Welcome, bienvenidos, benvindo, to the Copa Libertadores podcast, a collaboration between Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. I'm your host, Howard Hamilton, the founder of Soccermetrics, and welcome to a new project, one that SDH and I are excited to bring to you. Along with Jason Longshore, I have a love for South American football. And over the last 7 years, I've created advanced team and player metrics of every match of the Libertadores through Soccermetrics Data Partners Data Factory. We feel the time is right to develop an English language podcast of this wonderful competition to the listeners of Soccer Down Here. We really hope that you enjoy it, and we welcome any comments, suggestions, and questions that you might have. The group stage of the 65th Copa Libertadores kicks off this week. And starting this week, we will provide previews and reviews of every match week of the tournament. And when the tournament is not in session, we will have other features that convey the history and richness of this competition. I don't know the specific path that this podcast will take, but I aim to accompany you through this edition of the Libertadores, from the group stage all the way to the final in Buenos Aires at the end of November. So what is the Copa Libertadores? It is South America's top club football competition. And yes, I use the words football and soccer interchangeably. It is the goal of every South American club to achieve that eternal glory, la gloria eterna, of seeing their names etched on the Libertadores trophy. Clubs prioritize it, buy players that have a chance at it, go all out for it, literally spill blood so that they can parade that trophy before their fans. In a world in which the European game dominates market share in world soccer, you might wonder why you should care about the Copa Libertadores. I will argue that without the Copa Libertadores, there would be no European Champions Cup or Champions League. At least, it would have taken longer for the European club competitions to develop. Let's talk about that. The idea of an international club competition between champions of multiple countries goes back to the early 20th century. The Copa Audal, which was also called the Campeonato Rioplatense, was an official competition between the first division champions of Argentina and Uruguay, and played 14 times between 1916 and 1947. It wasn't played consistently, but up until 1940, the matches played as a single leg and alternated between Argentina and Uruguay. After 1941, it was played as a two-leg series, but that only happened 2 more times, and by the end of the decade, the competition was becoming redundant. That's because the Chilean giants Colo-Colo, in cooperation with CONMEBOL, South America's governing authority for football, started to organize a tournament that would feature the champion club sides of South America. The South American Championship of Champions, or the Campeonato Sudamericano de Campeones, was played in Santiago in 1948 with champions from 7 countries: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, and Uruguay. Not all the champions were national champions. Bolivia, Brazil, and Ecuador didn't have national championships yet. And Brazil, for example, did not even have a national championship until 1970. So they sent either city or regional champions. Peru's national champion actually declined the invitation, so the runners-up took part. And of the countries that didn't take part, Colombia's league was unsanctioned by FIFA and CONMEBOL, Paraguay was undergoing a civil war, and Venezuela weren't a member of CONMEBOL yet, though they did become a member in 1952. Vasco da Gama of Brazil won the tournament, and even though CONMEBOL doesn't recognize the tournament as a CONMEBOL official competition, they do recognize that Vasco won the first Continental Championship in South America. The South American Championship of Champions inspired Jacques Héran and Gabriel Arnaud, both journalists for France's L'Équipe Sports Daily, to propose and organize a European Club Champions Cup, which launched in 1955. In a later interview with South American media outlets in the mid-2010s, just a few years before he passed away, Aaron admitted that the influence of that South American club competition, he said, how could Europe, which wanted to be ahead of the rest of the world, not be able to accomplish a competition of the same kind of the South American one? We need to follow that example, end quote. By 1958, a few years after the European Champions Cup started, there was once again critical mass for a continental club tournament in South America. This time, it was the leaders of one of the two giants of Uruguayan football, Peñarol, who would take the lead in proposing the competition and its format. At a UEFA meeting later that year, João Havelange, who was attending as an observer from South America and would later become FIFA president in the 1970s, announced that this tournament was coming. And Henri Delaunay, the Secretary General of UEFA, said, let's have the European and South American champions meet in an intercontinental cup. And you'll hear that name a lot during the course of this competition. The following year, at CONMEBOL's South American Congress, Chile formally proposed the creation of the tournament, and all of the CONMEBOL representatives except one, Uruguay, voted to approve it. The name of the tournament would be Copa Libertadores, in honor of the revolutionary heroes of South America. The first edition of the Copa Libertadores started in 1960 with 7 teams, representing all the CONMEBOL countries except Peru, Ecuador, and Venezuela. By 1966, the tournament expanded to allow champions and runners-up, almost 3 decades before UEFA would allow non-champions to enter the Champions League. As the president of Peñarol would explain years later, the motivation for expanding the tournament wasn't just a money grab. Rather, he argued that in order to make the cup more meaningful, it was better to play it with 20 teams rather than 10. Quote, history has proven me right, he said. And he was right. Another difference between the Libertadores and its European counterpart is that the Libertadores has always had a group stage before the knockout rounds. Again, decades before the European club competitions would do the same. So that is how the Copa Libertadores got started. Over the next 6 decades, many clubs, players, and managers would write their legend in South American football. Peñarol, Santos, Estudiantes in the 1960s, Independiente in the 1970s, the emergence of Brazilian clubs led by Sao Paulo in the 1990s, Mexican clubs that were finalists in the 2000s and 2010s, and a Super Clasico final between Boca Juniors and River Plate in 2018. Players such as Alberto Spencer, Pelé, Ricardo Bochini, Zico, Jose Luis Chilavert, René Higuita, Enzo Francescoli, Martin Palermo, Ronaldinho, Neymar, and Gabigol. Managers such as Luis Cubilla, Luis Felipe Scolari, Dele Santana, Carlos Bianchi. You'll hear about all of those clubs, all those players, and all those managers over the course of this podcast. And I'm really excited to bring those personalities and those stories to you. So that concludes part 1 of this competition preview. In part 2, I'll introduce the teams that will participate in the group stage. Part 2 of this first episode of the Copa Libertadores podcast, a collaboration between Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. This year's edition of the tournament actually started on February 6th with the first preliminary round. Three preliminary rounds were played to determine four teams that would join 26 automatic qualifiers and the winners of last year's Copa Libertadores and Copa Sudamericana in the group stage. If you follow the UEFA Champions League, the group stage of Libertadores should look familiar to you. 8 groups of 4 teams that play each other home and away. The top 2 go on to Libertadores knockout rounds. The third place team drops down to the round of 32 of Copa Sudamericana. And the last place team drops out of continental competition altogether. So let's run through the groups. In Group A, the top seed is Fluminense of Brazil, appearing for the 10th time in the tournament. They are last year's CONMEBOL Libertadores winners, and the manager is Fernando Diniz. Next in Group A is Cerro Porteño of Paraguay, appearing for the 45th time. They were semifinalists in 2011, and they entered the tournament by being the first overall team in last season's Primera División that had not yet qualified. Next, we have Alianza Lima of Peru, appearing for the 29th time. Their best finish in the tournament was a semifinal appearance in 1976 and 1978. They were the second place team in last season's Liga I. And last in Group A is Colo-Colo of Chile. Appearing for the 36th time in the tournament, they were the first Pacific team to win Copa Libertadores in 1991. Jorge Almiron of Argentina is the manager of the team, and they were the third place team in Chile's Primera División. Group B. The top seeded team in Group B is Sao Paulo of Brazil. Appearing for the 22nd time in the tournament, they have won Copa Libertadores on 3 occasions, 1992, 1993, and 2005. They are the current holders of the Copa do Brasil. Next is Barcelona Sporting Club, not to be confused with FC Barcelona of Ecuador. Based in Guayaquil, they are appearing in Copa Libertadores for the 30th time. They were runners-up in the tournament in 1990 and 1998. They were the best team in Serie A on total points that had not yet qualified for the tournament. Next in Group B is Talleres de Córdoba of Argentina. Appearing for the 4th time, they were quarterfinalists in 2022, and they were the top team in the Primera División that had not yet qualified based on overall points total. Last in Group B is Cobresal of Chile. Based in the Atacama Desert, they are appearing in Copa Libertadores for the 3rd time, and their best result was a 3rd place in the group stage in 1986. They were the 2nd place team in Chile's Primera División last season. Now on to Group C. The top seeded team in Group C is Grêmio of Brazil. They appeared for the 22nd time in this tournament and are 3-time winners of Libertadores from 1983, 1995, and 2017. They were the 2nd place team in last season's Brasileirão, thanks largely to Luis Suarez's goals. Next in Group C is Estudiantes de La Plata of Argentina. They're appearing for the 18th time in the tournament, and they have won Copa Libertadores on 4 occasions. A three-peat in the late 1960s, 68, 69, and 1970, and a win thanks to Juan Sebastián Verón in 2009. They are the 2023 Copa Argentina winners. Next in Group C is the strongest of Bolivia, appearing for the 29th time. Their best result in the tournament was a round of 16 appearance in 1990, 94, 2014, and 2017. They are the current champions of Bolivia. Last in Group C is Huachipato of Chile. They're appearing for the third time in this tournament, and their best result was a second place in the group stage in 1975. The Steelers are the current champions of Chile. Now on to Group D. Group D is headed by Liga Deportiva Universitaria de Quito, or also called Liga de Quito. This Ecuadorian team is appearing in Copa Libertadores for the 21st time, and they were champions of Libertadores in 2008. They are the current holders of the Copa Sudamericana, which gave them a direct berth to the group stage of Libertadores. The second team in Group D is Junior. Based in Barranquilla of Colombia, they're appearing in Libertadores for the 18th time. They were semifinalists in 1994, and they were the champions of the Finalización tournament. That's a little hard to say, which is the second half of the domestic tournaments in Colombia. Last team, the next team in Group D is Universitario of Peru. Appearing for the 34th time, they were runners-up in the tournament in 1972. They are the current champions of Bolivia. Last in Group D is Botafogo of Brazil. They're appearing for the 6th time in Copa Libertadores, and their best result was a semifinal appearance in 1963 and 1973. They were the 5th place team in Brazil's national championship. Now on to Group E. Group E is headed by Flamengo of Brazil. Appearing for the 20th time in Libertadores, their best result were 3 Libertadores victories in 1981, 2019, and 2022. Led by former Brazilian manager Chiche, they were the 4th place team in last season's Brasileirão. Next in Group E is Club Bolivar of Bolivia. Appearing for the 38th time in Libertadores, their best result was a semifinal appearance in 1986 and 2014. They were the first overall team in Bolivia's Primera División that had not yet qualified. Next in Group E is Millonarios of Colombia, appearing for the 20th time. They had semifinal appearances in 1960, 1973, and 1974. They were the champions of Colombia's Torneo Apertura. Last in Group E is Palestino of Chile. Palestino, which was formed by the Palestinian community in Chile over 100 years ago, is appearing in this tournament for the 7th time. Their best result was a semifinal appearance in 1979, and they were the 4th place team in Chile's Primera División. Now on to Group F. Group F is headed by Palmeiras of Brazil. Appearing in this tournament for the 24th time, they have won this tournament on 3 occasions, 1999, 2020, and 2021. They are the current champions of Brazil. Next in Group F is Independiente del Valle of Ecuador. They are appearing in Copa Libertadores for the 10th time, and their best result was a runner-up appearance in 2016. They were the 2nd place team in Ecuador Serie A. Next in Group F is San Lorenzo of Argentina. San Lorenzo are appearing this tournament for the 18th time, and they won Copa Libertadores 10 years ago in 2014. They were the 2nd overall team in Primera División that had not yet qualified. Wrapping up Group F is Liverpool, not the Liverpool in England, but the Liverpool in Uruguay. They are appearing in Copa Libertadores for the fourth time, and their best result was a fourth place finish in the group stage last season. They are the current champions of Uruguay, and they're the first champions of Uruguay not to be Nacional or Peñarol in the last 10 seasons. Which brings us to Group G. Group G is headed by one of the giants of Uruguayan soccer, Peñarol. They are appearing for 49th time in Libertadores, and they have won the competition on 5 occasions: 1960, 1961, 1966, 1982, and 1987. They were the second place team in Uruguay's Primera División. Next in Group G is Atlético Mineiro of Brazil. They're appearing in this tournament for the 14th time, and they won Libertadores in 2013, inspired largely by Ronaldinho. They were the third place team in last season's Brasileirão. Next in Group G is Rosario Central of Argentina, appearing for the 13th time. They had semifinal appearances in 1975 and 2001, and they are the current Copa de la Liga winners in Argentina. Last in Group G is Caracas Football Club of Venezuela. Appearing for the 22nd time, they had a quarterfinal appearance in 2009, and they were the second place team in Venezuela's Primera División. Lastly, we have Group H, headed by River Plate of Argentina. Appearing in this tournament for the 40th time, they have won Libertadores on 4 occasions: 1986, 1996, 2015, and 2018. And they are the current Primera División champions of Argentina. Next in the group is Libertad of Paraguay, appearing for the 23rd time. They had semifinal appearances in 1977 and 2006, and they are the current champions of Paraguay. Next in the group, Deportiva Táchira, Venezuela. Appearing for the 26th time in the tournament, they had a quarterfinal appearance in 2004, and they're the current champions of Venezuela. Wrapping up Group H is the other Uruguayan giant, Nacional, appearing for an unprecedented 51st time in Libertadores. They won Libertadores on 3 occasions: 1971, 1980, and 1988, and they were the first overall team in Uruguay's Primera División that had not already qualified. So, looking at the groups overall, they look fairly even. CONMEBOL has had its own club coefficients similar to UEFA, and they've used it more to seed clubs in recent seasons, and it's resulted in more balanced groups. Every group contains at least one former champion, but there aren't groups that jump out as a group of death. Groups D and F appear to be the most even. One thing that does remain true is the importance of home form. Libertadores matches are played at night, but conditions vary from sea level on the Caribbean coast to high deserts to top of the Andes at 14,000 feet. And we haven't even started to mention the influence of the fans. But I want to finish with a few themes that I think will play out during this tournament. The first theme is the reemergence of Chilean teams in the group stage. Chile placed 4 teams in this season's group stage, more than any other country other than Argentina and Brazil. All of those teams were 4th seeds, which is indicative of how poorly Chilean teams have fared in recent seasons. Colo-Colo is a recognizable figure in South American football, but it's worth remembering that just 3 years ago, they narrowly avoided relegation from Primera for the first time ever. So I'm very interested in seeing how the more provincial sides like Huachipato, Cobresal, Palestino perform in the group stage. The next theme is home form. As I just mentioned, home form is very real in South American competition. The Andean clubs that play at altitude, such as Bolivar, the strongest, Independiente del Valle, Liga de Quito, they all play at over 9,000 feet. In the case of the Bolivian clubs, such as Bolivar and Strongest, they play over 12,000 feet. Cobresal, which is at the foothills of the Andes, play at 7,600 feet. If any of those sides are able to attain something close to maximum points, they have a very good chance of advancing out of the group. Of those teams, I believe that IDV and Liga are most capable of being dangerous on the road. And the last theme, which is the huge elephant in the room, can anyone challenge the Brazilians? Brazilian clubs have won the last 5 Copa Libertadores, which is an unprecedented streak in the history of the competition. Last season, River Plate looked like they could challenge Brazilian hegemony. And as a matter of fact, there was some really silly talk in the Argentine press about them being competitive with Manchester City or Real Madrid. But they faltered to Internacional de Porto Alegre in the round of 16. Independiente del Valle could have posed a challenge, but they threw away a winnable knockout tie. And don't even get me started on Michael Hoyos. Both of those teams are back in tournament, and they have the squad and the team structure to be competitive. At least one of the Paraguayan sides is good for a run to the quarterfinals in recent years. Now, will all the Brazilian teams advance the knockout round? I think it's a little doubtful, and I think it will be more difficult than previous seasons. Gremio is only in the Libertadores because of Luis Suarez's goals. And Luis Suarez is now alongside his best friend at Inter Miami. Flamengo won't have Gabigol for the next 2 seasons due to a ban on related to doping issues or interfering with doping issues. So they'll be without his services for the next 2 seasons at least. Botafogo have something to prove about their famous late season collapse. Sao Paulo were mid-table side in Brazil last season. Fluminense only entered this tournament because they won last season's tournament. They were 7th place in Brasileirão. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, there are very few sides in South America, with the exception of the Argentine Giants, who have the budget, organization, and experience to really challenge the Brazilian clubs. And only one of those giants will be in Copa Libertadores this season. So we shall see. That concludes part 2. In the third and last part, I'll go over the first match day of the group stage. Third and final part of this first episode of the Copa Libertadores podcast, a collaboration between Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. Now, I want to conclude this episode with a run-through of the first match day in the group stage. Matches will be played between the 2nd and 4th of April. Here are the matches. In Group A, Colo-Colo will host Cerro Porteño, while Fluminense will travel to Peru to play Alianza Lima. In Group B, Cobresal will host Barcelona SC, while Talleres play Sao Paulo. In Group C, the strongest will host Gremio, while Huachipato will host Estudiantes. Group D will see Universitario host Liga de Quito, and Botafogo will host Junior. In Group E, Millonarios will play Flamengo, while Palestino will host Bolivar. Group F will see Liverpool de Montevideo host Independiente de Valle, while Sao Lorenzo will play host to Palmeiras. In Group G, Caracas will host Atlético Mineiro, while Peñarol will travel to Rosario to play Rosario Central. Finally, in Group H, River Plate will travel to Venezuela to play Deportivo Táchira, and Nacional will host Libertad. So it's often said you can't win the competition in the early rounds, but you can certainly lose it. I don't believe that's necessarily true in the first match day of the group stage, but there are some matches that I think could be interesting. So my pick of the matches for this week include Universitario against Liga de Quito on the 2nd, which I believe is the most competitive matchup of the match week. Nacional versus Libertad, who will challenge River in Group H. Next is Talleres versus Sao Paulo on the 4th. Which side is legitimate? Talleres have had a really good run in domestic competitions in Argentina. Sao Paulo are a giant of a club. They're back in Libertadores, but they entered through the Copa do Brasil route, which is not necessarily the strongest route for a contender from Brazil. So which side is legitimate there? And lastly, on April 4th, the Palestino versus Bolivar. Both teams have an opportunity to make a statement of intent. And I'm really interested in seeing if Bolivar can carry on their positive performance in Libertadores from the previous season. So there are 60 matches to be played, with 6 on the 2nd, 6 on the 3rd, and 4 on the 4th. If you're a subscriber to Fanatis, Football Sports, or beIN Sports, you can stream all the Libertadores matches in Spanish, English, or Portuguese. So if you'd like to follow me and send a comment or a question my way, my Twitter or X handle is @Soccermetrics. You can also send questions or comments to @SoccerDownHere. I'll be back on Thursday or Friday to wrap up the first match day of the Libertadores group stage. Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of this project. And until then, see you later. Hasta luego. E hasta más.